The man history remembers as Giacomo Casanova was born on April 2, 1725 in Venice, then the capital of the Venetian Republic. He came from a family of actors. His mother, Zanetta Ferrucci, the beautiful daughter of a shoemaker, was just 17 when she married Gaetano Casanova, an actor at the Teatro San Samuele. Though Gaetano had assured Zanetta's parents she would not follow him into acting, a profession where actresses often doubled as courtesans to the elite, she soon joined his troupe. Over time, she became a celebrated figure in Venetian comedy, attracting many admirers. As a result, the paternity of all 6 of Zanetta's children, including her eldest Giacomo, has been questioned. Casanova himself later believed his true father was Michele Grimani, owner of the Teatro San Samuele. When Gaetano died in December 1733, the Grimani family took guardianship of 8-year-old Giacomo and his siblings. A sickly child prone to nosebleeds, young Giacomo was sent to Padua for cleaner air. On his 9th birthday, April 2, 1734, he endured an 8-hour boat journey. After 6 months in a lice-infested hostel, his mother left, leaving him resentful. He later claimed she had gotten rid of him. Poorly educated in Venice, he was placed in a class with 5-year-olds by his tutor, Abate Antonio Maria Gozzi. Despite this, Giacomo excelled, becoming Gozzi's favorite pupil. The priest helped him write letters to family in Venice, prompting his grandfather to visit and arrange for him to stay with the Gozzi family. There, he was cared for by Gozzi's teenage sister, Bettina, whom he developed romantic feelings for. In 1736, during a visit to Venice, Giacomo impressed his mother with his Latin skills, translating a vulgar riddle with wit at a family dinner. This acclaim, he later wrote, inspired his literary ambitions, though he wouldn't pursue writing seriously until much later. Back in Padua, the 11-year-old Giacomo had his first sexual experience with Bettina. While helping him put on stockings, she noticed his dirty thighs and washed them, an act Casanova later described as her carrying zeal for cleanliness too far. Though ashamed afterward, he remained lifelong friends with Bettina, even after discovering her affair with an older boy. In 1737, at just 12, Giacomo enrolled at the University of Padua to study law, graduating in 1741 with a thesis defending Jews' right to build synagogues. Though he preferred medicine, the Grimanis intended him for a clerical career. Returning to Venice in 1739, he took minor orders in January 1740, becoming Abate Casanova. Introduced by his parish priest, Father Tosello, he soon befriended Senator Alvise Gasparo Malipiero, a powerful figure who introduced him to high society. As a clergyman, Casanova also mingled with young convent girls sent there unwillingly by their families. Dressing fashionably and curling his hair, Casanova divided his time between church, Malipiero's palazzo, and the theater. When Father Tosello disapproved of his vanity and cut off his fringe while he slept, an enraged Casanova turned to Malipiero, who arranged for him to preach at San Samuele. His first sermon was a success, but his second in March 1741 was a disaster. He collapsed mid-speech and fled back to Padua to finish his degree. By late 1740, Casanova was infatuated with Angela Tosello, his priest's 17-year-old niece. Though she urged him to abandon the priesthood and marry her, he refused. In summer 1741, he accompanied the Count and Countess of Montereale to their estate, where he flirted with Lucia, their caretaker's 14-year-old daughter. He later claimed he gallantly refused to take her virginity, only to regret it when she eloped with the Montereale's messenger. Back in Venice, he became involved with the Savergnan sisters, Ninetta and Marta, whom he called his little wives until Ninetta married and Marta entered a convent. His confidence grew so bold that he flirted with Teresa Emer, an actress Malipiero desired. When the elderly senator caught them together, he struck Casanova with his cane and banished him from the palace. Since 1737, Casanova's mother had worked for Elector Augustus III of Saxony, also King of Poland. In early 1743, she secured Bishop Bernardo de Bernardis's patronage for Giacomo, hoping he'd rise in the church. Excited, she predicted he'd become a bishop in 20 years. But Casanova dreamed higher, the papacy itself. Sent to a seminary on Murano after his grandmother's death, he was expelled after being caught in bed with another boy. Briefly imprisoned, possibly by the Grimanis as punishment, he contracted gonorrhea from a Greek officer's wife on his 18th birthday. When Bishop de Bernardi passed through Venice, Casanova agreed to meet him in Rome. Broke, he learned to beg for alms from a Franciscan monk, brother Stefano. Though Casanova rushed ahead, he was robbed and detained before Stefano bailed him out. Upon reaching Rome, he found the bishop had already left. At Martirano, Casanova was dismayed by the bishop's poverty. After complaining, Bernardus released him from service, providing letters of introduction to Naples. There he tutored a noble boy in poetry before moving on to Rome. In Rome, Casanova became secretary to Cardinal Acquaviva, learning French, the language of diplomacy. He met Pope Benedict for Turin and impressed him. But his affair with Anna Maria Valati, a married woman, became public. When she became pregnant, Acquaviva dismissed him. Given a choice of destinations, Casanova shocked the cardinal by choosing Constantinople. En route, he encountered Bellino, a castrato singer he lusted after, only to discover he was actually Teresa Lanti, a woman disguised as a male performer. They had a brief affair, producing a son before parting ways. After losing his passport, Casanova briefly became a mercenary. Commissioned in the Venetian army, he sailed to Corfu in May 1745, then to Constantinople, where he was introduced to Ottoman high society. A philosopher, Yusuf Ali, offered his daughter's hand in marriage, but Casanova refused to convert to Islam. Imprisoned without trial, he spent months plotting an escape. Using a smuggled iron spike, he nearly tunneled out before being moved to another cell. With the help of a fellow prisoner, a priest named Balbi, he finally broke free in 1756, marking the start of a new chapter in his legendary life. On the evening of October 31st, Balbi successfully penetrated Casanova's cell. Capitalizing on the absence of the Inquisition personnel during All Saints' Day, November 1st, the pair managed their escape by ascending to the roof. He found that they were subsequently locked in, but a night watchman facilitated their exit to the outside. The two men fled to the Italian mainland, after which they parted ways. Following a week, Casanova succeeded in leaving Venetian jurisdiction, arriving back in Paris by January 5, 1757. Possessing social contacts yet lacking funds, he reached out to the Bellettis, who secured accommodation for him in a house nearby. He, Casanova, also resolved to find de Berny, who had returned to France in 1755 and was by then acting as Louis XV's Minister for Foreign Affairs. De Berny introduced him to Jean de Boulogne, the finance minister or comptroller general. Upon learning of a lottery initiative proposed by his compatriot Giovanni Casabigi to generate funds for the French state, Casanova performed some calculations and consented to serve as a trustee for the lottery. He leveraged the connections established at Parisian gambling venues to distribute tickets, which held the promise of making individuals millionaires should they select 5 winning numbers from the 90 available choices. The lottery proved highly profitable, not merely for the French government, but also for Casanova himself. He amassed a substantial fortune, yielding an annual income of 120,000 francs, and established lottery offices initially in Paris and subsequently throughout the nation. At 31 years old, he had finally attained a dependable income that allowed him to finance a lavish lifestyle, becoming a regular feature in Parisian high society. On March 1, 1757, Casanova observed the horrific execution of Robert-François Damiens, a former soldier who had tried to assassinate King Louis on the very day Casanova reached the French capital. In a well-recorded ordeal lasting 4 hours, Damiens suffered the tearing off of his skin, the application of molten lead, castration, and ultimately the quartering of his body by 4 horses while he remained conscious. His description of Damiens' execution stood in stark contrast to the glamorous existence he himself was leading. He developed strong feelings for Manon Belletti, the 17-year-old sister of his friend Antonio, who was herself a skilled musician. While journeying back to Paris in October 1757, he found himself sharing a carriage with the Comte de la Tour d'Auvergne, each man having a prostitute seated on his lap. Under the cover of darkness, Casanova took her hand and directed it towards his groin. Just as he was about to climax, de la Tour exclaimed, "My dear friend, I am indebted to you for this courteous and unforeseen Italian handshake, a salutation I neither anticipated nor merited," and erupted in laughter. The two men rapidly formed a close friendship. When the young nobleman became afflicted with sciatica during the winter, Casanova suggested a treatment, leading to de la Tour's swift recovery. His reputation as a mystical healer grew, leading to an introduction to his friend's aunt, the 52-year-old Marquise Jeanne d'Urfé, France's wealthiest woman. He had long professed belief in the Kabbalah, a mystical Jewish oral tradition positing that God revealed himself through enigmatic codes. The Marquise desperately sought to regain her youth by finding the Philosopher's Stone, and Casanova assisted her by translating Latin texts and deciphering algebraic codes he asserted came from an oracle named Perilous. He soon joined several other mystics who spent considerable time with her in the laboratories she had established at home for alchemical experiments. She confided in Casanova that she was also pursuing reincarnation as an alternative, believing her spirit could transfer into a young boy's body. Amidst his interactions with the Marquise d'Urfé, in late 1758, Casanova undertook another mission for the French state, traveling to Amsterdam to sell government bonds to fund military costs during the 7 Years' War. During this trip, he reconnected with Teresa Emer and attempted to gain custody of their 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, offering an investment in her new private club in London in return. Teresa declined to give up Sophie, but proposed her 12-year-old son, Giuseppe Pompeati, instead. Upon returning to Paris, Casanova presented the boy to the Marquise d'Urfé as the Comte d'Aranda, and she effectively adopted him as the vessel for an experiment aimed at transferring her soul into his. Despite the income from the lottery, he once again found it challenging to maintain his lifestyle, particularly after his supporter, de Bernis, fell out of favor with Madame de Pompadour in December 1758 and was appointed cardinal and dispatched to Rome. Casanova became increasingly dependent on the Marquise for financial support and continued to indulge her quest for eternal youth. Throughout the early 1760s, he persuaded the Marquise to embrace further schemes for her reincarnation that essentially amounted to extortion. In 1762, he unsuccessfully attempted to conceive a child with an actress posing as a countess in the Marquise's presence. The next year in Marseille, he tried the same with the mistress of his younger brother Gaetano, a dancer named Marcolina, before ultimately attempting to impregnate the Marquise herself while Marcolina danced before him. The Marquise consented to this, even after Casanova informed her she would perish in childbirth, allowing her soul to enter the child's body. Predictably, the Marquise, being in her late 50s, did not conceive and was finally convinced that his mystical assertions were baseless. His association with the Marquise d'Urfé facilitated meetings with the Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in 1759 and the renowned Voltaire a year later in Switzerland. He and Voltaire debated Italian literature and theater. Voltaire expressed surprise when Casanova, still evading Venetian justice, contended that Venice was among the world's most liberal cities. Although Casanova portrayed himself as an admirer of Voltaire, he disagreed with Voltaire's stance against the Catholic Church and would later condemn his political radicalism. In 1760, Casanova started identifying himself as the Chevalier de Saint-Gall, a fabricated noble title which happens to be an anagram for genitals. Besides his governmental work in Amsterdam, he traveled under this name to German and Swiss cities including Cologne, Bonn, Stuttgart, Zurich, Bern, and Lausanne, prior to his encounter with Voltaire near Geneva. His frequent travels fueled speculation that he served as a spy for the French government, although definitive proof is lacking. For the subsequent 2 or 3 years, he journeyed aimlessly across France and Italy, continually expanding his record of romantic conquests. During one winter in Florence, he reconnected with Teresa Lanti and met his 16-year-old son, Cesare Filippo. While in Rome for Christmas, he obtained an audience with Pope Clement XIII, also a Venetian. He presented the Vatican Library with a valuable book acquired in Switzerland and was consequently awarded the Order of the Golden Spur, legitimizing his use of the Chevalier title. In Naples during January 1761, he encountered Leonilda, a 17-year-old girl serving as the mistress to the impotent Duke of Mantalone. He abandoned his efforts to seduce her upon discovering her mother was the widowed Anna Maria Velati, making Leonilda his own daughter. He rekindled intimate relations with the 36-year-old Anna Maria, and they discussed marriage, although she would only agree if he committed to staying in Naples. As he traveled northwards through the Italian peninsula, he aimed for the Bavarian city of Augsburg. There, he had arranged to represent the Portuguese government at a planned peace congress intended to negotiate terms for ending the 7 Years' War. Upon arrival, he learned the congress had been called off, leading him to return to France and Italy. While visiting Turin in September 1792, he met and befriended the English nobleman Hugh Percy, Baron Warkworth, who was undertaking a grand tour of Italy. When Casanova went back to Paris in May 1763, his substantial mail included letters from Teresa Emer in London, now calling herself Teresa Cornelis after her Dutch lover, Cornelis de Rigorbus. He accepted her invitation to visit the English capital, bringing along Teresa's son Giuseppe and the jewels gifted by the Marquise d'Urfé. Casanova reached England on June 11, 1763, but waited until the 13th to visit Teresa at Carlisle House in Soho Square, where she hosted exclusive gatherings and concerts for an aristocratic audience. Teresa had cultivated a respectable social standing and was wary of the potential effect Casanova and his Parisian ways might have on her events. After encounters with several English courtesans, he decided he desired a more stable lover with whom he shared a language. On July 5th, he placed an advertisement in the London Gazetter and Daily Advertiser, seeking to rent space in his Pall Mall flat to a single lady who could anticipate some peculiar advantages within the agreement. The woman ultimately selected was a Portuguese Catholic brunette he called Pauline. They had a briefer affair until she returned to Portugal in early August. He also housed 10-year-old Sophie, his daughter with Teresa, at his premises before enrolling her in a boarding school in Hammersmith. Having drifted somewhat aimlessly through Europe for several years, the 38-year-old Casanova tried to settle in London, but his finances persistently diminished. In London, he re-encountered Marie-Anne Charpion, a teenage courtesan he had met years before in Paris. She had been supported by Francesco Morosini, the Venetian ambassador, but Casanova consented to establish her in Chelsea. However, their relationship remained unconsummated when they went to bed, and he later discovered Marie-Anne desired forgiveness for her family's debts to him. Although he agreed, she continued to refuse him, provoking him to threaten her violently before quickly regretting his actions. He was briefly held at Newgate Prison for assault, but convinced the judge of his innocence. He sought revenge by purchasing a parrot, training it to repeat, "Mademoiselle Charpion is more of a whore than even her mother," and then leaving the bird at the Royal Exchange near the Bank of England. Depleted of funds, battling depression and venereal disease, Casanova departed London in early 1764 to continue his adventures across continental Europe, financed by Bragadin and his Kabbalist associates. Having failed to introduce a lottery scheme in England, he aimed to lobby King Frederick the Great of Prussia in Berlin via an old connection, the Scottish Jacobite Lord George Keith, then a Prussian field marshal. His initial meeting with Frederick was unsuccessful. The king expressed his view that lotteries were scams targeting ticket buyers. Despite this stance, Frederick permitted Casanova's associate Giovanni Calzabigi to operate a Prussian lottery. Weeks later, the king offered Casanova a position as a tutor at the elite military cadet school, teaching etiquette and international relations to aspiring aristocratic officers, but the Italian declined. While establishing himself within Berlin's theatrical circles, he was persuaded by some old acquaintances to visit the Russian court in St. Petersburg. Departing Berlin late in the year, he reached the Russian capital on December 21, 1764, securing a house on the prestigious Millionaya Street, situated between the River Neva and the city's primary avenue, Nevsky Prospect. Established by Tsar Peter the Great in 1703 on the Neva Delta marshes and known as the Venice of the North, St. Petersburg was still undergoing significant construction during his visit. The 34-year-old Empress Catherine II, historically known as Catherine the Great, had been ruling for only about 2 years following her usurpation of power from her estranged husband Peter III. Through Italian dancers at the court theater, he was introduced to influential figures like Ivan Yelagin and Nikita Panin, and also Princess Ekaterina Dashkova, the Empress's close confidant and advisor. Although he first glimpsed the Empress at a Venetian masquerade ball in the Winter Palace upon his arrival, several months passed before he could converse with her. In early 1765, while meeting friends near the Ekaterinhof Imperial Palace, he encountered a peasant girl and arranged to purchase her as a servant from her father for 100 rubles. Naming her Zaire after the protagonist of a Voltaire play, he took her as his lover. He also instructed her in Italian, purchased clothing for her, and the couple became a noticeable pair along Millionaya Street. The 17-year-old Pyotr was noted for his feminine appearance, leading Casanova to suspect, not for the first time, that he was encountering a woman disguised as a soldier. Pyotr responded to the insinuation by unfastening his breeches, thereby refuting Casanova's hypothesis. Upon returning home, he faced a jealous outburst from his mistress, which led him to take her to Moscow. Following a week of sightseeing in Russia's historic capital, they went back to St. Petersburg, where Casanova awaited an invitation from the Winter Palace to meet the empress. Acting on a suggestion from Count Panin, sometime during the summer's white nights, the period of midsummer twilight, Casanova positioned himself in the summer gardens to intercept the imperial entourage, which included Panin. During his initial conversation with the empress, they discussed the city's music scene. In their second encounter, Catherine inquired about Venice and the Gregorian calendar used in Catholic nations. The Venetians successfully explained why the new calendar more accurately aligned dates with the Earth's orbit. Catherine contemplated adopting the new calendar, but worried about opposition from her Russian Orthodox constituents. During their third meeting 10 days later, he was surprised to find Catherine informed about the differing methods for calculating Easter in the Eastern and Western churches. Although he hoped for a position at the Russian court, potentially involving his lottery scheme, he met the empress only once more before departing Russia without securing any appointment. After leaving Zaire in the care of the Italian architect Antonio Rinaldi, who would design several prominent landmarks in St. Petersburg and nearby imperial residences, Casanova departed Russia on September 1st, arriving in Warsaw, the Polish capital, on October 10th. He carried a letter of introduction to Prince Adam Kazimierz Czartoryski, a powerful statesman and cousin to Poland's new king, Stanislaw II Augustus Poniatowski. The king's ascension to the elective throne in 1764 was largely due to the influence of Empress Catherine, his previous lover. Besides having audiences with the king, Casanova toured the country, staying with affluent aristocrats. On March 4, 1765, 5 months after reaching Poland, he attended a performance at the Royal Theatre and went to greet 2 Italian dancers afterward. One dancer, Anna Bonetti, was displeased that he hadn't visited her first and convinced her lover, Franciszek Savary Bernicki, to confront him. Angered by being labeled a Venetian poltroon, Casanova challenged the Polish nobleman to a pistol duel, resulting in injuries to both men. News of the duel reached the king, prompting an investigation which revealed the Chevalier de Sengalt was not a nobleman and was significantly in debt. He was compelled to leave Poland, departing on July 8, 1766. The duel paradoxically boosted his fame and notoriety. In subsequent years, he and Bernicki became good friends. After leaving Warsaw, he stopped in Dresden to see his mother, then in her late 50s, before proceeding to Vienna and other German cities. While in Paris, he received news that his patron Bragadin had died at age 78. His situation worsened when he was expelled from Paris, likely due to pressure from the Marquise d'Urfey's family or his numerous creditors. Consequently, he opted to travel to Spain. There he sought government employment from the actual Conde de Randa, the Spanish prime minister, but his request was predictably denied. As his debts mounted, he was briefly jailed in February 1768 for possessing concealed pistols. His circumstances didn't improve significantly after his release, forcing him to leave Madrid. Later that year in Barcelona, he encountered further trouble when attacked by 2 men. After fatally wounding one attacker with his sword, he was imprisoned for over 40 days. Upon release from Spain in early 1769, he wandered through southern France in poor health, attributing it to syphilis. During a 4-month stay in Aix-en-Provence, he learned his former lover Henriette was present. She dispatched her housekeeper to care for him. He delayed visiting her until departing Aix, deciding to stop by her chateau en route to Marseille. Learning from the same housekeeper that Henriette was actually at her townhouse in Aix, he left a letter for her. In her response, Henriette revealed they had unknowingly attended the same social event, but he hadn't recognized her, noting how much both had aged. She mentioned she was now a widow and wealthy enough to offer financial assistance if needed. While advising against his return to Aix, she expressed willingness to maintain correspondence. He claimed they exchanged letters for the remainder of their lives, though these are not found in his archives. Venetian records indicate that he had been attempting to regain favor with the authorities since the 1750s and sought permission to return to his native city. Although engaged in translating Homer's Iliad into Italian and writing a history of Poland, he composed a 3-volume political analysis of Venice's government, later known as the Confutazione. Despite praising the Venetian government extensively, he initially received no reply after sending a copy to Venice in December 1769. At the Tuscan port of Livorno in January 1770, he met Count Alexei Orlov, the Russian nobleman whose brother Grigory was Catherine the Great's lover. Orlov was assembling a fleet to combat the Ottoman Turks. He declined Orlov's offer to join the campaign, which culminated in a major Russian naval victory at Chesma in early July, and instead traveled overland across Italy. En route to Rome, he shared transport with a young English woman named Betty, who turned out to be a close friend of his daughter Sophie from the Hammersmith boarding school. Although he succeeded in winning Betty away from her male travel partner, he reluctantly agreed to pose as her father in public settings. He then proceeded to Naples, where he seemed to encounter old acquaintances frequently. Before departing, he made sure to visit Anna Maria Velati and their daughter Leonilda, now in her mid-20s and married to an elderly, wealthy nobleman. Anna Maria expressed doubt that Leonilda's husband could provide her with a child. This conversation paved the way for an incestuous encounter between him and Leonilda in the garden. A few weeks after Casanova left for Rome in September 1770, Leonilda discovered she was pregnant. Back in Rome, he reconnected with de Berna and sought his assistance in gaining access to young nuns. He confessed that as he aged, his attraction to younger women intensified, even those related to him. In Rome, he encountered Mariuccia, a woman with whom he had a brief affair in 1761, resulting in a daughter, Giacomina. Giacomina's music tutor was coincidentally the former mistress of his brother Giovanni and the mother of their daughter, Guglielmina. Mariuccia orchestrated a meeting for the four of them and engaged in intimacy with Casanova while the young girl slept naked nearby. Although he abstained from sexual activity with his own daughter, he readily engaged with Guglielmina while Giacomina observed. Following a 6-month residency in Rome, he continued his travels throughout Italy, eventually arriving in Trieste. He persisted with his writing projects, finishing his study on Poland's recent political history, which was finally published in 1774. While in Trieste, he re-established communication with Venetian authorities and performed espionage tasks for them. This work led to his pardon from Venice in September 1774, permitting his return to his home city after a 19-year absence. His memoirs, composed in his final years, cease abruptly in 1774, making details of his subsequent life harder to ascertain. On September 14th, he returned to Venice, reuniting with many childhood friends, including Angela Tiselli and his former fiancée, Caterina Capretta. Although Bragadin had been deceased for several years, his friend Marco Dandolo offered Casanova lodging at his palace. He published 3 volumes of his Iliad translation between 1775 and 1778, before abandoning the effort due to insufficient interest. By 1776, he had resumed collaboration with the Venetian Inquisition, receiving a monthly payment of 15 ducats. His attempts to reconcile after realizing his overstep were unsuccessful, and he departed Venice on January 17, 1780. By September, he was residing with his brother Francesco in Paris, where he encountered Benjamin Franklin, the American ambassador to France. In 1784, he secured employment as secretary to Sebastian Foscarini, the Venetian ambassador in Vienna. Upon Foscarini's death in April 1785, he needed new employment and ultimately accepted a position as librarian for Count Joseph Karl von Waldstein at the Castle of Dux in Bohemia, modern Duchkov, Czech Republic, near the spa town of Teplis. He frequently visited Prague, where in October 1787 he met Lorenzo da Ponte, another Venetian known as a libertine and theater enthusiast, also exiled from Venice. Although da Ponte and Mozart consulted with Casanova about the opera's subject, and he contributed some verses, these were not included in the final libretto when the opera premiered on October 29th. At Dux Castle, he wrote extensively, though much remained unpublished. In 1787, he penned an account of his dramatic escape from the Venetian prison over 30 years earlier. He explored philosophy and mathematics and tried to further develop lottery concepts. His Ecosamarkon, a 5-volume science fiction novel based in England, was poorly received by the unfortunate friends who read it. Instead, his memoirs, spanning roughly 4,000 pages and incomplete upon his death, would secure his historical recognition following their 1820 publication in German translation from the original French. While primarily known for his romantic exploits, his History of My Life offered valuable insights into 18th century European society across diverse topics, including politics, cuisine, theater, fashion, religion, morality, and sex. In November 1797, he intended a final trip to his native Venice, then under occupation by Napoleon Bonaparte's French Revolutionary Army, which effectively dissolved the Republic of Venice after 100 years. His health prevented the journey, and on June 4, 1798, he died at 73, leaving the manuscript of his unfinished memoirs. Giacomo Casanova is most famous as one of history's most prolific lovers, his name remaining synonymous with seduction and sexual impropriety. While his memoirs contain ample evidence supporting this reputation, notably his later tendency to share his bed with partners young enough to be his daughters. Some actually being his daughters, he was also among Europe's sharpest social observers, navigating high society for over 50 years despite his modest background. His lifestyle, though remarkable, wasn't entirely unique for his era, but the emotional depth of many of his affairs distinguishes him. Born into a Venetian theatrical family, he struggled for stable employment throughout his life, adopting various roles: priest, adventurer, lover, spy, mystic, financial promoter, diplomat, writer, and librarian. Despite spending much of his life heavily indebted and striving to uphold a high society existence, a blend of charisma, intellectual acuity, and sexual magnetism allowed him to attract wealthy patrons who provided financial support throughout his life. He epitomized Venice in 18th century Europe. His death at the century's close, a year after the Venetian Republic's demise, seemed to mark the end of an era. His world centered not on universal rights or total war, but on opera houses, masquerades, balls, salons, and the clandestine romantic encounters they facilitated. What is one's opinion of Giacomo Casanova? Does his reputation for sexual immorality and impropriety merit condemnation? Or should his actions be evaluated by the norms of his time? Ought he inspire one to embrace life fully, or act as a cautionary tale about the perils of unrestrained living?